Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Every town has that story of the kid who went too far. That kid is either in prison, dead, or has simply never been the same. Such is life. But in this story from Lay B, we learn there is an alternate and possibly more terrifying fate for that kid who thinks rules are for goobers. And that fate would be encountering disturbing beings that should not exist. Lay B warns us with her story to beware and respect the moon-eyed people of the Blue Ridge Mountains. This is a tale from the break room. I grew up at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a sub-range of the Appalachians in the Piedmont region of North Carolina. The folklore and legends from my state always fascinated me as a kid, and my family begrudgingly tolerated my exploration of the subject. We took evening drives up the parkway to see the Brown Mountain Lights. We once drove to Bear Creek, North Carolina, to see the infamous Devil's Stomping Ground. On a trip to the Outer Banks, we made a point to visit Topsoil Island, where the Gray Lady is meant to pace the beach. The older I got, the more history intertwined with the folklore and legends from my state, and these connections always piqued my interest. In my teens, I explored cemeteries where Civil War soldiers were buried, and I navigated revolutionary battlefields with alleged sightings and hauntings. I went to a university in the South, majoring in history and folklore, graduating with honors. I paid to take courses in cemetery iconography and preservation. I volunteered with my local historical society. I did these things to understand the history of my home, but also hoped that maybe one day I would find proof that the folklore rang true, that there was something special about the legends in North Carolina which had survived through oral tradition for decades, passed down through generations of North Carolinians. It's no surprise that my career path took me into similar realms. I am a cultural heritage public historian, meaning I work for museums and sites of public history throughout North and South Carolina. My specialty is oral history. I basically supplement artifacts in museums with stories from ordinary Carolinians who choose to tell me about their lives. These stories become archived interviews, which are held in archival repositories in perpetuity. Through oral history and public history work, I've managed to turn my interest in social and local history into a career, and I've met some of the most fascinating and interesting people along the way. Ethel was one of those people that I will never forget. I first met Ethel in the fall of 2015. Museum staff were doing research for an exhibit on sharecropping, and a family friend suggested I interview her. If she agreed, of course. Sharecropping, for those unfamiliar, was an exploitative system suffered by poor farmers, both white and black, in the period after the American Civil War. Landlords contracted out land in return for a portion of the crop yield, hence the name sharecropping. The majority of sharecroppers across the South were poor white families, and it was one of the only ways for farmers to earn a living prior to the Second World War, if they didn't own any land. It was an unpredictable way of life. Sharecropping forced families to farm cash crops like tobacco and cotton for the highest yields, but also left them reliant on good growing conditions and at the mercy of the landowner. Life was so difficult under these conditions that farm families relied on the labor of their own children for help, and the children began performing chores and tasks around the farm as early as 4 or 5. Ethel was pushing 93 when I contacted her for an interview, but despite her age, she was sharp as a tack. I made the initial contact with her through a telephone call, where I explained what a life history interview was, and where I laid out the benefits of recording her oral history. She seemed wary, not of the practice of recording her story, but of the value it might have. She didn't believe her life would make an interesting story. Oh, how she was wrong about that. With additional questions asked, and with me assuring her that her experience with sharecropping was useful to our exhibit, we decided on a date and time for the interview. Now, given her age and thinking of her comfort, I suggested recording the interview in her house, which was well into the mountain region of the state. I was thrilled when she agreed, because it meant I could take advantage of staying at my grandparents' mountain home, a vacation home they had purchased in my preteen years. The mountain house, as we called it, was a 3-bedroom cabin tucked into the Grandfather Mountain area of the Blue Ridge Mountains. You had to traverse a pretty steep road with no guardrails to make it up the hill and into the gravel driveway. The house itself was 2 stories with a full basement. The basement was mostly used for laundry and the storage of deck chairs, swings, and outdoor games and equipment. The second floor had floor-to-ceiling glass windows, which looked into an open, airy living room with a massive rock fireplace. The dining area and kitchen were both on the second floor as well, as the whole floor was open concept. At the foot of the stairs leading up to the second floor was the door leading to the wraparound porch. The second floor held 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and 2 additional balconies, which overlooked the first floor wraparound porch. The house itself was built above a steep gully, maybe 20 feet deep. When my grandparents first bought the place, we all started to call this drop in the earth the gorge. As in, kids, stay well away from the edge of the gorge. The porch and second-story balconies overlooked the gorge, and we all enjoyed sitting outside and watching wildlife in and around it. As a family, we only visited the cabin during the spring, summer, and fall for get-togethers and Sunday lunch cookouts. Otherwise, the cabin offered a quiet weekend away for anyone who would find the time to make the drive. This was exactly what I hoped for the weekend I was set to interview Ethel. I planned to head to Ethel's house, interview her for a few hours, maybe do some work Friday afternoon, then spend Friday evening sipping wine on the porch of the house. Saturday, I would wander around the local museum and shops, maybe take a short hike to see some waterfalls in the area. Sunday morning, I would start down the mountain, making it home in time for Sunday lunch at my grandmother's. The following Friday, after my call with Ethel, I packed the car, eager to start the drive through the Blue Ridge Mountains. I threw an overnight bag into the back seat, along with my interview pack and a few bags of groceries, snacks, and wine. With the car loaded, I was off. I drove up the highway, snaking my way into the mountains of North Carolina, sunroof open to smell the sweet scent of rhododendron as I progressed upward. I tuned into a favorite local radio station, WNCW, and spent the journey listening to bluegrass and folk music of the mountain. I was in my element. The drive took almost 3 hours. During the last half hour or so, I lost cell service and my GPS signal. But I navigated the back roads with a paper map, arriving only 15 minutes late. When I finally pulled into Ethel's gravel drive, she was waiting for me on the porch in a weathered rocking chair, a faded knit cardigan covering her legs. "Hi there," I called after exiting the car and stretching my back. Ethel responded with a rock forward in her chair and an "mm-hmm" as she moved to stand up and walk into the house. "Come on inside," she called behind her. I noticed she was surprisingly limber for someone in their 90s. As I followed her in the house, I let the screen door slam behind me, and she motioned for me to sit before heading into the kitchen. "Y'all want some tea?" she asked from the other room. "No, ma'am, I'm okay with water for the interview," I replied, as I began unpacking my interview bag. I was setting up the recorder and the external mic, checking the batteries and volume, when she sauntered back to the sitting room with a glass of cold sweet tea in one hand and a water in the other. She sat in a worn cloth chair which engulfed her large frame. "So," she said, staring at me intently, "you're here to listen to me blather about growing up on this here mountain." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "That's exactly right. And specifically, what it was like to sharecrop as a family in the 1930s. She paused, continuing to look at me. "I've got to say, I'm really excited about this, Ethel," I added. "Your family worked the land a long time, and I think your story is important to capture." She took a long sip of her tea. "All right then," she sighed. "What you want to know?" Ethel had amazing insight into the topic. She talked about the family farm. They were sharecrop farmers, as most folk in Appalachia were in those days. She picked cotton from the age of 5, tending the hogs and chicken with her 7 brothers and sisters. She told me about her responsibilities, the things she did with the little bit of leisure time they were given. She told me how she helped make the children's clothing from old feed sacks, and how she and her sisters made dolls out of sticks and twine. And she told me about her father, who helped 2 other local men make moonshine deep in the holler beyond her house. Her favorite time of year was Christmas, the only time the children got oranges, some nuts, and a bit of chocolate as Christmas gifts. I was fascinated by her history growing up in the area, and would have happily kept listening for hours. In a lull between stories, I asked, "Did all the children have jobs on the farm? It must have been a bit easier with 7 of you sharing the work." Ethel paused for a minute, looking away from me, toward the door. As an oral historian, we're trained to let people sit with their thoughts, to not interrupt, so I waited for her. After a long pause, she reflected. "Really, there were only 6 of us, not 7. You can't count Clyde. In fact, we never really talked about Clyde after the accident." I paused for a moment myself, waiting for Ethel to pick up the story, but she was silent. I wasn't surprised she had lost a sibling. Hell, it was surprising 6 of the 7 had made it past infancy, given the time period and the mortality rate in Appalachia. However, something in her silence put me on edge. I waited about 30 seconds before asking, "Ethel, can you tell me about your brother Clyde?" Ethel placed her glass of tea on the end table, not meeting my eye. She was staring down, avoiding eye contact with me. "It's a shame, really. He just didn't believe Daddy, or maybe that day he just didn't want to listen. I don't know. But he stayed out after dark, and he never came back." Ethel's face depicted a mix of regret and sadness. The memory had cast a shadow over her, and really the entire room. However, this was the kind of memory that I'm trained to follow up on, although I think the key driving factor at this point was my own curiosity. "Ethel," I said, "I would really like to know more about Clyde, if you're all right talking about it." She looked at me hard, with a bit of judgment, I thought. "You didn't grow up in these mountains. You don't know the legends." She said it curtly, and there was a subsequent pause between us. "Nah, not just the legends," she said, "but the rules of what folks can and can't do. The rules that keep the balance and the harmony and keep folks safe." I was a little self-conscious, because as much as I felt I was an insider into this community, clearly she didn't see me like that. So I acknowledged her observation and asked, "Can you tell me about the legends, and about these rules?" This wasn't what I'd come for. I was supposed to find out about her childhood, and about sharecropping, about her life beyond the farm. But I couldn't help but follow up on this question, my own curiosity and intrigue guiding me. "Listen, child, there are rules to these mountains. You don't pay mind to things, you hear? If you seen something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. You just keep walking and you keep ignoring it, and you never run, and you never look back. Clyde knew that. We all knew that. But when you're a youngin', when you're just a boy, you don't know no better. Clyde was just a boy, really. He stayed out too long and the moon-faced people knowed it." I suddenly realized how cold and uncomfortable I felt. It was like a cold snap had engulfed the room. I had chills, and suddenly felt completely underdressed for a visit to an old lady's living room. The moon-faced people? That was a new one. I racked my brain for a connection to local folklore and legend, but I had nothing. I had no idea what she was talking about. She saw it in my face, though. I must have looked confused, like I was trying to place something that I had no connection to. She countered my confusion with an explanation, possibly in the same language her mother and father used with her and the other children. Yes, the moon-faced people. They were here well before us. The Cherokee have legends. They're only about at night with their big eyes and little bodies. They hide in the caves during the day, and they don't take no disrespect. If you stay out at night and they find you, you ain't coming back. She sat further back in her chair, reaching for her glass of tea. And you think they had something to do with Clyde disappearing? I asked cautiously. Well, of course they did, she quipped. Clyde was only about 10. He would go and play with the Simon boys 3 farms over when they had some time, but he had to cross the creek down the bottom of the holler, and he knew he had to start back home before the sun went down. Me and my younger sisters were too little to venture that far, and you know how it was. Boys were men when they was born, let to do anything. So me and my sisters would stay behind. We'd build fairy houses out of moss and stones, and we played in the yard till Mama called us in for supper, or until Clyde got back. But that night, it was sometime in the fall, before the cold snaps at night, and that night, Clyde didn't come back for supper. Daddy waited a while before he set out with our old dog and his shotgun, and I remember thinking, that gun ain't no good. The moon-faced people got him now, and he ain't coming back. Ethel looked defeated, but she sighed and sat up a little straighter, with a "what can you do" type of expression on her face. So he never turned up? Your father didn't find anything? I asked. Nope. The Simon boys said he'd left their farm that night. Later than usual, mind, but not that late. Daddy looked all through the woods, and some local folks joined in as well, but for 3 days, they didn't find nothing. Then, they found his body, floating in one of the creek pools. Said he'd drowned. Maybe he slipped and fell in trying to get home, but I knowed better. Clyde was tough. He knew these mountains. He could swim better than any of us. It was the moon-faced people. Maybe he didn't follow the rules. Might have tried to run. Maybe he took a shortcut somewhere he ain't ought to be. Maybe he tried to talk to him. That's all it takes, you know. And do you know, none of us kids ventured off the farm for the next year at least. Mama's rules. Only Daddy went up to the still with the old dog. We was careful and we let them know that's their territory, and we ain't up to trespassing it. Ethel and I had been talking for hours at this point, and she seemed tired. She finished her tea, and after a long swallow, she said, We didn't talk about Clyde after that year. It wasn't 'cause we didn't miss him. We was busy, you know. Daddy had lost him a farmhand, and us girls had to start doing more of the farm work. It was a hard year. But soon enough, my 3 youngest brothers came along, and we just moved on with life. Wasn't much else to do back then. That seemed to be the end of the story for Ethel, almost like she wasn't willing to discuss it further or to take more questions on the subject. I knew it was time for me to leave. I looked for a way to start wrapping things up, thanking her for her time and telling her I'd let her get back to her evening. I packed my bag with the recorder and microphone, taking the glasses back to the kitchen for her. She stood up to walk me to the door, but didn't come out onto the porch, stopping at the screen door instead. I turned around on her porch steps to tell her thank you again, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking into the woods around her house. Our farm was just through them there trees, about half an hour's walk. I ain't never walked down to where they found Clyde, but it ain't far. That creek runs down from Tennessee and through the whole county and more. There's crags and caves in some of the gullies too. Best not to disturb any of those, 'cause that's where they hide during the day. With that, her attention snapped back to me, and she looked up to the sky. Time you get on down the road. Shouldn't be talking about them no more. It'll be pure dark soon." I pulled my glance away from the woods, curious about the farm she'd spent the afternoon talking about. I let her know. "Oh, it's no problem, Ethel. I'm just heading down the road a bit to my grandparents' cabin for the night. I don't have very far to go, actually. Nothing like the trek up the mountain anyway. But you have a great night. I'll be in touch about the exhibit progress." I was walking toward my car when she asked, "Where's your folks' place?" "Oh, we're just over Linville Way. I'll be there for the weekend, then I'll be heading back down the mountain on Sunday." Her eyebrows furrowed for a moment, but then she gave me a wave and said, "All right then." She turned to go back into her house, pausing with her back to the screen door. "Just be careful if you're staying round here," she said over her shoulder. "Remember what I was telling about the rules and all that?" And with that word of warning, she walked into the house, closing the front door behind her. I thought about Ethel's story during the drive over to the cabin. Not so much the sharecropping bit, but the beliefs passed down through what was bound to be generations of mountain folk. Beliefs so real to them that they were used to explain a child's death and keep the other kids at home for a year. And what in the hell were moon-faced people? I was buzzing with excitement when I finally made it to the cabin. I put away my overnight bag and unloaded the groceries in the kitchen cabinets and fridge. I settled in on the couch with a glass of wine and a poor excuse for a charcuterie board, cobbled together from things I'd brought up the mountain, and a block of cheese purchased on a roadside stand I'd passed coming into town. Between bites of cheese and crackers, I was researching moon-faced people in Appalachia, absorbing anything I could about these entities fresh on my radar. The creatures Ethel called moon-faced people were actually the moon-eyed people, an ancient Cherokee legend. Creatures with short, small bodies, white skin, and perhaps blue eyes, but noticeably flat faces with large hollows around the eyes. Some say they're Native American interpretation of seeing European settlers for the first time, but other sources put the moon-eyed people in the region well before the Cherokee made it their home. They're said to reside in caves during the day because of their light skin, only emerging at night, navigating by the light of the moon. Even more interesting to me was the statue that was unearthed in the 1840s of moon-eyed people. It was found in Butler, North Carolina, on what would have marked a prominent road during the Trail of Tears, when Native Americans were displaced from their homelands and forced to relocate to the west, often on foot. More archaeological evidence supposedly sits in Georgia, at Fort Mountain State Park, where an erected stone wall is attributed to the moon-eyed people, built as protection from the Cherokee. I stayed glued to my computer for another hour, reading everything I could find, although most sites and stories just corroborated each other. Cherokee legend, small people, possibly blue eyes, but definitely round hollow eye areas. Only come out at night due to light sensitivity and live in caves. One thing that did baffle me was the locality of these stories. They spanned the westernmost portions of North Carolina, around Cherokee County, into Georgia and Tennessee. Ethel's family resided hours from this area, and that was with modern roads. The legend had obviously traveled throughout the mountain region by word of mouth. My research was interrupted after about an hour by a phone call from my mother. "Hi, honey. How did the interview go?" I grabbed my cigarettes and lighter and an old heavy coat hanging by the door before heading out to the porch to speak to her. "It went really well. Fascinating, even," I said, as I plopped into one of the rocking chairs, overlooking the steep gorge behind the house. "The sharecropping stories will be perfect for the exhibit, and I've asked her to see if she can find old photos to better represent the family. You know, give a face to the voice telling the story. That kind of thing. She's gonna get back to me on that next week." Mom seemed pleased it went well, and started to change the subject to discussions around what we would make for Sunday lunch, when I stopped her. "Mom, there's one more thing though. The end of the interview was, well, I don't know. Maybe spooky is the right word. "What do you mean?" she asked. I took a long drag from my cigarette, then launched into the story Ethel had told about her brother Clyde and the moon-faced people. I told her about the harmony that supposedly existed between folks on the mountain and these entities, about Ethel's warnings and about the rules. I then explained what I'd found in the few hours of research I was able to do before she called. "I mean, there are actual statues, Mom. I even thought about driving out to the museum in Butler tomorrow to see this thing in real life. Can you imagine uncovering such an artifact in your own backyard, knowing it was left behind during one of the most horrific events of ethnic cleansing in American history? It's just wild." Well, my mother didn't seem to know exactly how to respond to all this. She couldn't have told her story to a more interested party, I'll give you that. But you know, Leigh, you're up there by yourself this weekend. Maybe you should shelf any other research until you're back home. I don't want you winding yourself up. Besides, you know how mountain folk can be. It's all superstition built around teaching kids lessons. These moon people, or whatever they're called. It's just a way to warn their kids to be home on time. Not to stay out after dark. Advise against entering caves. Those sorts of things. I was a little annoyed at her reaction. She knew I was passionate about any folklore-related topics. Yet it felt like I was being brushed off. I finished my cigarette and pulled my jacket closer. The wind was starting to blow colder through the trees. Right, well, I'm gonna head inside now and finish my glass of wine. Might just call it an early night. Besides, the wind is picking up and I'm freezing out on this porch. She sighed. All right. She could tell I was annoyed with her response. Well, have a good night and I'll speak to you later. Make sure you wake up in time that you're not late for Sunday lunch, too. Got it, Mom. I'll see you soon. I hung up the phone in a huff. Despite the cold, I wasn't really ready to go inside yet. I stood up, lighting another cigarette and walking over to the balcony edge. The gorge below was steep, but the house was built to make use of its depth and natural beauty. When they first bought the house, we were all scared of falling off the balcony and into that gully, and the adults took extra measures to make sure the smaller kids did not go near the edge. It wasn't terribly deep, though. You could see the bottom, covered in limbs and leaves, and my cousins and I used to vow we were going to find the other side one day. The opening couldn't be far, and we were sure it led to caves and curiosities, but we never attempted to find it. Without thinking, I looked down and yelled a loud, "Hello!" into the gorge. It was too windy to hear much of an echo. I yelled again, "Hello!" But all I heard were trees rustling in the wind. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the forest, enjoying the cold against my face. I finished my cigarette while leaning against the porch railing, looking up at the sky. It was a dark night, too cloudy to see stars. I turned back to the gorge momentarily, ready to get inside, into the warmth, when something caught my eye. I paused and tried to concentrate my stare on the pale thing at the bottom of the gorge. It was roundish, with an almost iridescent coloring. It wasn't bright, just pale. And moving? Was it moving? The thing was shifting itself as if it were walking. At times I could make out the roundish head. Then it would disappear into the side of the gorge nearest me, blocking it from view. I stood there another 2 minutes, watching it saunter along at the bottom of the gorge. It was so dark, I could only make out its movements from the pale, hazy light it cast. It wasn't moving fast, and at first it reminded me of a deer sauntering through the forest, stopping to nibble at grass, in no hurry to move on. Just as that thought entered my mind, just as I thought, there's no way this can be a deer, the figure disappeared into the left side of the embankment, and it was gone. I waited another few minutes, but I saw nothing. I was suddenly so cold, chilled from the wind, but also by this thing. This dull moving light at the bottom of a gorge that was, from my understanding, inaccessible for miles. Maybe my mom had a point, and I had just creeped myself out. That, coupled with staying alone in the cabin, probably caused me to see something that wasn't actually there. With a shiver, I grabbed my cigarettes and moved to walk inside the cabin, giving one last glance to the gorge, but seeing nothing but darkness. I decided to put away my laptop for the night. Turning on the TV for a distraction, I settled onto the couch with a blanket and a glass of wine. I found a romantic comedy I'd seen about a dozen times and tried to let it distract me from my thoughts of those moon-eyed people, and from whatever I just saw. My mind raced through the possibility that I'd just seen some sort of animal, that maybe it wasn't as cloudy as I'd thought. Maybe the moonlight managed to illuminate portions of the gorge, and that's what I equated to its movement. But none of the explanations made sense. After my third glass of wine, and with lower inhibitions, I decided to heck with this. I should be able to go back out onto the porch and have a cigarette. Moon-eyed people be damned. Once again, I grabbed the heavy coat from the rack, stuck my cigarettes and lighter into the pocket, and opened the porch door. It was quieter now. The wind had died down a bit, and I could hear the sounds of the forest around me. I settled into my rocking chair, deliberately looking away from the gorge. I lit my cigarette and began rocking, my eyes fixed on the opposite side of the porch, toward my parked car. The squeak of the rocking chair was calming as I rocked back and forth, lulling myself into a sense of calm where I was safe. Where I was in the mountains surrounded by forest and scents of fresh fauna, at my family's favorite place. I was remembering a particularly fond family cookout on that very porch when I heard it. Someone somewhere said my name.
May.
My whole body tensed as I abruptly stopped rocking. I sat completely still, letting my cigarette burn as I listened closely. I heard it again, quietly, almost like a whisper. I heard a pleading voice call, My one-syllable name was elongated to 3 or 4 seconds. Its tone begged me to respond, almost as though it were in pain, almost as though it needed my help. I felt my heart beating hard in my chest. My body was tense as I sat as still and as quiet as possible. I sat this way for minutes without hearing a sound outside of the rustle of wind in the trees. It was long enough that I started disputing with myself that I'd heard anything at all. Maybe it was just the wind. Wasn't that what people always said when they heard sounds in the woods while alone? The tension had subsided with the passing time, and I could feel my body giving up its rigidity of the last 5 minutes when I heard the name again. This time it was fast and angry, and it was louder.
Lay.
It seemed to be coming from all sides of the gorge. I couldn't place it as I hurriedly stood up, knocking over the side table next to me. I hesitantly looked over the balcony for the source of the sound, or for the pale light, for anything that might explain what I'd heard and seen this evening. Soon, I saw it, straight across from me. Not in the gorge any longer, but on the opposite side, directly across from me. It was pale with a round face and hollows for eyes. It was a short humanoid form, slight in build, but I could make out the legs and arms for the first time. I froze. Maybe it was the wine, but I felt as though I could not move, like my brain was trying to register what it was seeing. I was staring at this thing, trying to make sense of what it could be. But then it started to move. It was walking, slowly, parallel to the porch, with just the opening of the gorge between us. A rush of panic flooded my senses, and I opened my mouth to scream. I almost choked on the sound, trying to escape my lungs, when a dawning recognition struck. I remembered Ethel's warning. I remembered the rules. And I remembered what happened when Clyde didn't follow them. You don't pay mind to things you hear. If you seen something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. You just keep walking, and you ignore it, and you never run, and you never look back. My thoughts were flooded with the realization that I'd spoken about the moon-eyed people aloud, on the porch, to my mother. I shared the deep Appalachian folklore passed down quietly through families for generations. I went so far as to question their existence on that call, to share I was doing research in an effort to understand where this myth, this folklore, originated. I spoke about artifacts being found and historical connections throughout the region. My mind recalled all the talking points. What exactly had I said? Did I do something to draw them to me? The gorge would be the perfect place for them. Dark and cavernous, with so little access from the outside world, so little reach for the sun's rays. I was still staring at the figure as it continued to walk, its pale form navigating the ridge slowly and deliberately. Its pale face was turned toward me as it walked, with little attention to the forest floor. Outwardly, I was shaking. I'd crossed my arms, hugging my torso for comfort. I felt sick. My mind was racing, but I managed to pull my thoughts together to try to be practical. Right, I thought. I didn't actually see it, and I didn't actually hear anything. I'll turn around, walk back into the cabin, and just lock up for the night. I'll pull the blinds and barricade myself in the master bedroom. All I need is the morning light. All I need is to wait it out until morning. As it continued to walk slowly along the ridge, I turned away, pulling my gaze from the creature. I began to calmly walk inside. I locked the porch door behind me, lowering the small blind on the door's glass. I went into the living room, with its high ceilings and tall windows built for the morning sunlight. The room felt unsafe now, with clear views of the road leading to the cabin. I turned off the TV, pulling the curtains on the first-floor windows, the only curtains available to close. I continued this throughout the first floor, closing the kitchen blinds, the ones in the small dining room. I left the light on, and all the lamps. Then I made my way to the master bedroom on the second floor. The master had a small balcony overlooking the gorge as well. In fact, all the bedrooms overlooked the gorge, facing the back of the house. I locked myself inside the room, then made sure the door to the balcony was locked. I pulled the curtains tight against the balcony door and sat on the bed, my heart pounding. But my adrenaline was starting to wane. It was approaching midnight at this point, and having drank a bottle of wine with cheese and crackers for supper, my eyes were growing heavy, regardless of my pounding heart. I did not want to fall asleep, even though I was exhausted. I quickly turned on all 3 lamps in the room for more light, hoping that this would deter anything from trying to come into the house. The moon-eyed people couldn't stand light, so surely I was safe in a lamp-lit bedroom. I crawled under my covers, my phone in hand in case of an emergency, and I waited. For half an hour, nothing happened. No calls of my name or even loud whistling of the wind. Eventually, my exhaustion won out, and I fell asleep at some point. The bedside alarm clock read 3:22 when I awoke in the dark. I was confused as to where I was for a moment, looking around the dark bedroom for something familiar. Then the situation rushed back to me, and I sat straight up. All 3 lights, my beacons of hope and saving grace, had been switched off. Was it a power cut? It couldn't be. The alarm clock still worked. Then I noticed the light of the moon. It was pouring in through the glass balcony doors. The clouds must have dissipated at some point in the night. I scrambled to the left side of the bed, as far away from the balcony doors I could get, looking in terror as the moonlight streamed in. The electricity is one thing, but I distinctly remembered closing the curtains. They were my protection against seeing the moon-eyed people again, against seeing the gorge at all. I began to shake with panic. My phone lay on the bed, feet away from me. But who would I call? What would I even tell someone if I called? I was being targeted by what? A Cherokee legend? I tried the bedside lamp. The switch clicked on and off, but no light. If the electricity was out, maybe my phone had enough battery to provide some light. If I could grab my phone and turn on the flashlight, I could potentially dash to the balcony, close the curtains again, and check the lock on the bedroom door. Then it was only 2.5 hours until sunrise. I was sure I could stay alert for 2.5 hours. I crawled along the bed to grab my phone, then quickly ambled to the left side, as far away from the balcony as possible. 30% battery. A relief flooded over me. I switched it on and left it face down on the side table, illuminating most of the room. I took a few deep breaths, trying to muster the courage to run to the balcony door. I waited a few minutes, listening intently and hearing nothing before I finally convinced myself to move. In a mad dash, I jumped off the bed, running to the balcony door to pull the curtains. I got the right curtain closed, and I went to grab the left, when that pale light caught my eye again. It was below me, standing next to the rocking chair I'd left just a few hours ago. The moon-eyed thing. I could see it now a little better. Still a humanoid figure with distinct arms and legs. It was just a body, though, no clothing, but small in stature, maybe 3.5 feet high. Its whole body was glowing pale, but its face was so wrong. It was very round with no discernible mouth. The most striking feature were those hollow eyes, almost gape-like, and I couldn't see anything but holes. It was standing adjacent to the porch door, beside the rocking chair, in the exact spot I'd stood while watching it walk parallel to the gorge, and now it was staring straight up at my balcony doors. It wasn't a full moon, and I only looked for a few seconds. But that image, that feeling of invasiveness, that it had invaded my property, my sense of safety, and that it knew which room I was currently in, that feeling will never leave me. I jerked the left side of the curtains closed and threw myself onto the bed, crying uncontrollably. How had it made it to my porch? That gully stretched throughout the valley, and I was unaware of where to even cross it. More so, what the hell had I done to draw these things to me? With that thought, I started to imagine what Clyde could have possibly done to anger these moon-eyed people. Had he seen the same thing I was seeing now? Clyde, whose story had brought us here, and Ethel, who shared a family legend, some mountain folklore, then me, who stupidly repeated it all out loud into the gorge. I stayed curled up against the top of the bed frame for what felt like an hour, with only the phone illuminating the room. Soon it would be morning, I kept telling myself. Soon this will all be over, and I can go home, and I will swear off this whole region. I would stay happily in the Piedmont, avoiding any cave or gorge or dark forest for the rest of my life, if I could only survive this night. I hugged my legs and cried. I cried until I eventually fell asleep, sometime after 4 a.m. I awoke to light streaming in through the balcony curtains. It was the soft sunlight of dawn, and the illumination around the curtain's edges was the most incredible sight of my life. My eyes were puffy and irritated from crying, but I got up off the bed and slowly opened the curtains. It was a gorgeous morning. The gorge and ridge surrounding the cabin were glowing with the morning sun, illuminating trees just beginning to turn to their autumnal reds and golds, and a slight dusting of frost on the ground below. I slowly peeled the curtains back and looked down at the porch. The rocking chair sat motionless, the side table still overturned. But, other than that, It was just as I'd left it last night. There were no signs, or not that I could see from above, of the moon-eyed people. I fully opened the curtains, then tried the bedside lamp. It turned on at the click of the switch. So did the lamp in the corner, and the one on the desk. The electricity was working just fine. I sat down on the edge of the bed, confused, and with a bit of a headache. I remembered everything so vividly. I saw something in that gorge. It then reappeared out of the gorge, on the other side of the embankment, and it terrified me by coming onto my porch, standing exactly where I'd been when I first glimpsed it, staring up at me, up at my bedroom. All of it never felt like a dream, and I never doubted it. I had been more scared than I'd ever been in my life after seeing it, and that is not something you simply dream. It was that moment that I flew into action. I splashed some water on my face and began packing my toiletries. I'd hardly unpacked my overnight bag, but I changed into my leggings and a sweatshirt, throwing my pajamas into the bag. I grabbed my phone and its charger, and I took the stairs 2 by 2. As soon as I reached the landing, it hit me. It was incredibly bright in the living room. I glanced around and realized that every single curtain and blind that I'd closed were now completely open. The large windows in the living room were fully visible, streaming in the morning sunlight. The curtains I'd closed last night, the ones covering the ground floor glass, were open. The kitchen and dining room too. Even the small shade covering the porch door was pulled open. It was as though it was sending a sign that I hadn't been safe from them, and that the light was no obstacle at night. That same anxious adrenaline flooded me again as I set my bag on the couch. I tried the lamp in the living room. It worked, clicking on and off. My initial thoughts were validated. It wasn't electrical. There was no outage. This was something else. This was a targeted attack on the lamps in my bedroom that somehow stopped once it was light outside. This was a message meant to warn me, to show me that I had somehow trespassed or disrespected these people. I stood another few minutes just gazing around the room, thinking about the curtains, about the lights, when I decided it was time to get the heck out of this house. I grabbed the few groceries I had stored in the kitchen, shoving them into grocery bags. I left the wine glass and plate in the kitchen sink, not wanting to stay long enough to wash and put them away. I was at the front door in under 2 minutes, grabbing my keys as I reached for the handle. I turned the knob and opened it when I stopped. The door was unlocked, even the deadbolt, which I had absolutely locked when I came back from my interview with Ethel. My hands were shaking as I pulled open the door and bolted out. I locked both locks, taking the stairs 2 by 2 down to my car. It was 6:50 a.m. when I started my car and began reversing down the drive. There would be no museum visit for me, and I definitely would not be staying around long enough to visit the national park, quaint town, or the immensely popular attraction, the Linville Gorge. I was done with the Blue Ridge Mountains, and more of a believer than I'd ever been. I called Ethel the next week to follow up on our conversation. I thanked her again, noting how invaluable it would be to preserve her memory of mountain life. We exchanged pleasantries for as long as was comfortable, and I was ready to end that call and my ties to Ethel when she remarked, "Those stories about Clyde, those memories I tell to you, you can't use them for the museum." I wasn't surprised. Narrators often have objections to certain things shared in the heat of the moment. I assured her, "Oh no, Ethel, those stories aren't really relevant here. In fact, if you wanted me to remove them from the interview audio itself, I can do that. You can still archive your interview, but we won't include those portions, as they're quite personal to you." "Ain't because they're personal, eh?" I was surprised at how exasperated she seemed, and a little confused. "We can't be talking about them. That's all. I don't know if I should have even told you." "Right," I said. I knew exactly what she meant. I knew more than she could have ever imagined. I said uneasily, "By the way, Ethel, I had an experience at my grandparents' house after I left our interview." She was completely silent. "I was just wondering if you thought maybe—" She cut me off. "If you seen something, no you didn't. If you heard something, no you didn't. I hope to God you just kept walking and you ignored it, and that you didn't run, and you never looked back. That's all I'm gonna say on that. Some of us folks still have to live in these here hollers." I had nothing to say except, "Yes, ma'am." With that, our call ended, and I never ever spoke openly about the Moonite people again. My mom tried to follow up at Sunday lunch, asking why I'd ended my trip early and how the research was going. I let her know it was a bit of a disappointment, that I'd found nothing else, and it seemed it was just a legend after all. In fact, I announced I don't even think Ethel was speaking about the same folklore or legend I'd found. None of it added up, but that was all a lie. There was nothing to the stories at all, I lied. My family feigned interest for all of 20 minutes, but the topic was never broached again. As for that house, the mountain house, I didn't return for any family gatherings for the next 3 years. By 2018, my grandparents had decided to list it. While I was sad that part of my life would be gone, I was also relieved. I had an excuse to never step foot on that mountain again, and to never have to see that gorge. I moved to Scotland 6 years ago, and it's only now I feel comfortable sharing anything about this encounter. I'm still not sure what exactly those things were, because I stopped researching, and I stopped searching for answers. I amended the audio before giving it to the museum, so no one has ever heard Ethel's story, and I never spoke about it to anyone aside from my mom. I share this mostly to document a legend that I'd never heard of, but has now fundamentally shaped my life because I did not listen to the advice given to me. I also share it out of respect for the rules and the harmony that folks in the Appalachian Mountains have lived by for decades. I still love to read about North Carolina history, and I miss the beauty of the Blue Ridge Parkway in the fall. But thoughts of that region beyond that fill me with anxiety and dread. So, please, learn from my experience before careless actions leave you with the most traumatic experience of your life. Don't sweep folklore and legends under the rug of fiction. Often these stories linger because they serve an important purpose. Maybe it's to warn folks about staying out after dark or traveling dangerous paths. Sometimes, however, it's a reminder that we share this world with beings that wish to be left alone, lest you suffer a painful price. Good night. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. And if you want more of my scary story narrations, find my other show, Unexplained Encounters, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Also, you can send me your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. Till next time, everyone, I'd better clock out. But I'll be clocking in again real soon.